Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I would like to talk about what may be the ultimate combination for the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. The ideal published Nintendo titles they can put out that will excite the fan base, show the abilities of the console, and maximize sales potential, not just to start the generation, but to also kick off some great momentum that will lead to a very successful generation overall. What might be this combination? I have some ideas in mind for what it could be, and that's what I want to get into today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Nintendo Switch 2 comes out. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now, looking over the history of Nintendo console launches and seeing the lineups they've chosen for day one, there's a lot of head scratchers out there. I do not know why Nintendo chose to launch the 3DS with Steel Diver, Pilot Wings Resort, and the pack-in Face Raiders. Those games, plus the very high price for the console, led to a very rocky start. And so Nintendo doesn't want to put themselves in that kind of position. I do think they have learned their lesson. They've seen what leads to successful console launches. You look at the Nintendo DS, it had Mario 64 DS and Metroid Prime Hunter's First Hunt. The Wii had Twilight Princess, Wii Sports, and Excite Truck. And the Switch had The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, 1-2 Switch, and Snipper Clips. Having at least one big major game there, with another perhaps having widespread casual appeal, seems to be the right ticket. And Nintendo might have kind of tried to do this with the Wii U launch, but I think they really missed on what exactly that should be. So their lineup for the Wii U was Nintendo Land, maybe that game having widespread casual appeal, and then New Super Mario Bros. U, a 2D Mario game. They might have thought that that could have been like a big adventure game that would have excited a lot of people, but it was a cookie-cutter 2D Mario that felt very similar to prior 2D Marios, and it didn't really inspire people to jump onto the Wii U train early on. Nor did it get people thinking, whoa, this is a huge, awesome, next-generation HD Nintendo game. And so going into the Switch 2, I think what they need to do is have that experience that we're like, whoa, that is an amazing epic experience that I would love to play on my next-generation Switch. Yes, but also having some sort of game that has potential for widespread casual appeal, and maybe something else thrown in there for additional variety. I think some combination like that would work really well. And it's not like they have to put out all their best games on the very first day. A big part of why the Switch was so successful wasn't just the strong launch, but also the consistent quality games that came soon after, every single month throughout that first year and throughout the entire generation of Switch. That, alongside the form factor of the Switch and its marketing, I think is what led to its great success. So Nintendo probably should emulate that, and from everything we've seen, they look to be doing so. They are calling it Switch 2, which is unprecedented for Nintendo to do, but it is what makes the most sense from a marketing branding perspective, and as a result, because they are trying to emulate the Switch environment, third parties seem more eager than ever before to jump on, because it looks like they're going to be guaranteed to have pretty strong sales, just like what Switch offered throughout its generation. And so there are going to be some big third-party games at launch, but what we're focusing on here are the Nintendo titles, what only Nintendo put out there. And I think we have a pretty good hint, because we've already gotten the reveal trailer for Switch 2, and they showed off one game. That one game was Mario Kart, the next brand new Mario Kart. I've seen some people arguing, oh, it might be a port, it might just be like a really poor improvement over Mario Kart 8, it might even be something still playable on Switch. I don't agree with any of these things. Yes, we've only seen a few brief seconds of this game, but this is a new Mario Kart. All new animations, there are some visual effects happening in the background that just aren't possible on Switch. The environments are huge, they have double the amount of characters, and it's all new stuff. So this is going to be a new exclusive game, and this is Mario Kart. The sales potential is enormous. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the best-selling Nintendo game of all time, not counting Wii Sports. And so they're following that up with a new Mario Kart, a new console Mario Kart from the ground up, something we haven't seen since 2014. The potential for this game is incredible, and I do think having it being the first title they show off for Switch 2 comes with the implication that it will be at least an early on title, but also very likely a launch title. You look at the Switch 1 first look trailer, the first title they showed was Breath of the Wild. You look at the Switch OLED reveal trailer, the first title they showed was Metroid Dread, and that was also the title that came out alongside the console. So I do think there's a little bit of a history here that does suggest that the first game they show likely will be launching with the console. And so Mario Kart feels like a pretty darn good bet. And so how does this game fit? And that's where I start to scratch my head a little bit. Because Mario Kart, I wouldn't quite compare to a new 3D Mario or a new 3D Zelda. Mario Kart games have never been the big single-player experience. They are, however, huge multiplayer games that have mass casual appeal. And so while some people might look at this game and see it as something kind of like a Twilight Princess, a Breath of the Wild, a Mario 64 kind of like game that every sort of hardcore Nintendo fan is going to want day one, and it might be that, but at the same time, it is also Mario Kart, which appeals to a much wider audience beyond just the hardcore Nintendo fan that would buy the console day one, and it's a big multiplayer game that brings in the family and friends and all. So it kind of does a little bit of both here. And so if Nintendo is indeed choosing Mario Kart to be the launch title, it's a little bit of a unique scenario. But I do think it's going to work really well. Who is not going to want Mario Kart? It's going to be huge. But there's something else I think we should focus on here when thinking about the launch title. It's not just about how amazing and big of a game it's going to be, but also about showcasing the console. And when we talk about things like Nintendo Land, Wii Sports, 1-2 Switch, while these kinds of games did have widespread appeal that appealed to the casual market somewhat similar to Mario Kart, there is also a key difference. These different games were compilations that showed off the various features of the console, and Mario Kart might not do that. Although I do think the Switch and also the Switch 2 do fit really well with Mario Kart, and they sort of help to showcase each other, in the sense that Mario Kart is extremely pick up and play. And so wherever you take your Switch, if you have Mario Kart on there, and you have a friend nearby or a family member or whoever, you can literally take off a Joy-Con and just hand it to them like, hey, here, you can play with me. And so I think on Switch 2 that experience is going to be even better, as we discussed in the past, because the Switch 2 screen is larger, an 8-inch screen, so playing with two people on the go, it's going to be a little bit of a better experience because the viewing experience is literally bigger and sharper. But then also the Joy-Cons themselves are bigger and more ergonomic to hold, it appears, with bigger shoulder buttons on the sides, the SL and SR buttons, and so it's going to make that multiplayer experience out of the box with the Joy-Cons more pleasurable and more comfortable, and that might help to sell more people on the concept of the Switch 2, having Mario Kart there day one. So there is an interesting fit and showcase from that perspective. But then you have this unique functionality that Nintendo has essentially confirmed with the reveal trailer, the mouse functionality of the Joy-Cons. I'm not quite sure how that would work in Mario Kart unless there's like maybe a track editor or something like that where you need a cursor to sort of aim around and do different things. That would be crazy, and in a good way. But I should also point out that this mouse functionality, while certainly unique and very cool, it's not something we're going to be using all the time because you still need a table surface, and we don't have a table surface everywhere we play. So it's a functionality that I'm not so sure is as big of a deal as, say, like the motion controls for the Joy-Con. But of course, there's something new, so we're going to pay more attention to it, sure. Point is, I don't know if Nintendo needs to go out of their way to make sure they have functionality for the mouse controls in the next new Mario Kart. But if there's a track editor, sure, go for it. But I do think it does make sense to have a game that does take advantage of this functionality in the beginning. And so maybe there is actually some sort of multiplayer game that uses this functionality. I used to theorize that maybe Switch Sports Resort would be a really good fit to be a day one title for Switch 2. And I think in some cases it would, but I don't see how a Switch Sports Resort would make sense with the mouse controls or the Joy-Con, unless we're doing like some tabletop kind of games and not like really sporty games where we're like swinging around bats and using bows and swords and things like that. It would be a very different experience. But I also don't think a Switch Sports Resort kind of like game would be as much needed if you have Mario Kart at launch. I think if you're going to have a big multiplayer game like Mario Kart, you don't want to have another big multiplayer game come out the same day. You want to spread them out a little bit. And so if we were talking about Mario Kart being a big launch title, I then also think about, well, what about that big single player experience? I think that is important for Nintendo to have day one. And maybe Mario Kart does have a big single player campaign this time around, and maybe that's how Nintendo can sort of get away with it, while also having some big third party games that do offer that big single player adventure experience. And if there are some big first party games that have a big single player experience that come out soon after, maybe in the second or third months of the Switch 2, then it won't really be that big of a deal. But I am going to entertain the idea that there will also be a big single player game alongside this big multiplayer game. Some people might say, oh, give us 3D Mario, and that would be amazing. But I think having two huge Mario games coming out the same day is not something Nintendo would ever really do for the launch of a new console. I think more likely, it's either Mario Kart at launch or 3D Mario, if we're getting one of them, and the other would be the holiday title. So we're seeing Mario Kart this early, I think that's well positioned to be the launch title, and 3D Mario will be the holiday title, which makes a lot of sense. And so if that's the case, what else could be the big single player experience that would make sense at launch? And we've theorized this before, but what if it is Metroid Prime 4 Beyond? Part of me doesn't think this is going to happen, even though I have predicted it in the past. And that's because if Mario Kart's the big launch title, I don't know if Nintendo wants to put two really big Nintendo games like that on the same day together. Mario Kart will do fine, but might Mario Kart overshadow Metroid Prime a little bit? Possibly. But also, at launch, a lot of people buy more than one game. If you're an early adopter, you're likely a fanatic and more willing to pay more than just the bare minimum here. I'm sure there are some who will only buy one game, but buying multiple games at launch is a common thing to do. And so if there is a time for Nintendo to release two big games on the same day, it would be day one. Not to mention, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is a Switch 1 title, so this game would still come out for Switch 1, and would be selling copies outside of the Switch 2 environment, but I've been theorizing that there will also be a cross-generation version. And after the Switch 2 reveal, I think it makes more sense than ever, because I do think you should have some kind of game that shows off the functionality of the Switch 2, such as those mouse controls. Those mouse controls would be ideal for a first-person shooter. Mouse and keyboard have always been touted as the best way to play first-person games, and now Nintendo can facilitate that with the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, and Metroid Prime 4 could have that functionality on Switch 2. Not to mention, it is a big single-player game that's very different from Mario Kart. Metroid Prime 4 has that more mature audience appeal that's a single-player game, while Mario Kart has more of that family appeal that's a multiplayer game. They're basically like the two most opposite style of games Nintendo can put together that are both still the kind of games that hardcore Nintendo fans, the early adopters, are going to want and be excited about day one. And so this scenario where we get both Metroid Prime 4 and Mario Kart day one might actually be kind of feasible. I understand having two big Nintendo titles at the same time might be a little bit hard to believe. And so I'm not saying this is happening with 100% certainty, but I kind of think it's a relatively decent possibility. And I will point out that there was this rumor going around from Samus Hunter that Metroid Prime 4 is the launch title. Now, they didn't think it would be Mario Kart, and while it's not confirmed yet, Mario Kart does seem like the launch title, so I'm now skeptical of this Samus Hunter rumor. But theoretically, Metroid Prime 4 could also be the launch title, and then they wouldn't have been totally wrong. Maybe they heard about Metroid Prime 4 being a launch title, but they didn't hear about Mario Kart, so they made the assumption it wouldn't be. And of course, there is the other possibility that Mario Kart isn't the launch title, and Nintendo simply decided to show it off in the reveal trailer because they wanted to have some sort of cool new Nintendo game shown off in the reveal trailer. But I really think the combination of Mario Kart and Metroid Prime 4 works so well. They contrast with each other, they show off different elements of the console, the new functionality of the Switch 2, and I don't really think they would get too much in the way of each other, because when I'm playing a big single-player game, maybe I don't want to jump into another big single-player game, but I will be willing to jump in to play some multiplayer matches of Mario Kart. And these games could do some really cool things in terms of appealing to a large audience here. Mario Kart always has a widespread appeal, but then with Metroid, because it is a first-person shooter that targets a little bit more of a mature audience, this might also appeal to a lot of people who might be interested in the variety of big third-party games that will be available on Switch 2, and so it might actually turn out to be an even better fit than some are thinking. And so could these be the ultimate launch titles? Or might there be a slightly different approach that Nintendo takes? Maybe it'll be Mario Kart and just some sort of weird game that uses the mouse controls like Mario Paint or something. And then in month 2 or 3 we see things like Metroid Prime 4 or Donkey Kong or what have you. And as I'm finishing up here, I just got a bit of a brain blast, I think. So remember that game that Nintendo was having us test out for the online playtest program? That game that if I share any footage for, they will likely take down this video? But it was basically a game where you could roam around this open environment with others. It was a massive multiplayer online game, and you could edit the environment and explore around and grapple around. A game that would benefit by having pointer controls, or perhaps the mouse Joy-Con, and also maybe some communication features that we also theorize will be modernized on Switch 2 and having to do with that C button that Nintendo strangely obscured in the reveal trailer. I wouldn't be surprised if this game ends up being that weird digital download that you can get day one for Switch 2, kind of like snipper clips for Switch 1, but this would probably be a little bit of a bigger deal, and there probably still would be a Switch 1 version, but the Switch 2 version would take advantage of some of the unique features of the console. That's just another possibility I'd like to throw out there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How will the things shake out here? I'm very interested to see what you all have to say. But that's all for now. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.